Is Fat Sally fat? Good morning, YouTube. Welcome to the Reptile Barn. I have a long one for you. It's a doozy. Lots of things to cover. Mostly things that I have seen out in the reptile world. A lot of things online. Some things that confuse me. And I would like to talk about them. So let's jump right in. I have seen people talking about how do you know when your ball python is fat. I've seen people talking about how much should you feed your ball python. I have seen people talking about how should you house your ball python. And how do you know that these things are true, right? Because if you compare how they act and what they eat and how they look in the wild, and that doesn't match up with what's going on in captivity, what is the discrepancy there? Okay, so first, very first, let me back up. People are taking things that either are completely false or are not sound science, and they are using these ideas to back up their opinions, right? This has always bothered me in every field of life, not just reptiles, right? People are far more interested in feeling like they're right than in actually being right. Or in other words, people want to win and feel validated in their biases more than they want to seek out and find the truth and then follow that, if that makes sense, okay? So, what is the gold standard of science then? If I am sitting here demanding that all of people's opinions online be based in science as much as possible, well, what is that? I'm going to read something to you. Now, this comes from the medical field. It does not come from wildlife. But I'm going to read it anyways, and we'll talk about how we could apply that to wildlife, okay? Research comes in many forms and is conducted in many ways. The careful evaluation of a single case, called a case study, can help us describe and make sense of a certain situation or condition. Statistical techniques are used to analyze census or survey data from thousands of people. Or in wildlife, you would call this an observational study, right? You go out, you take a bunch of measurements of some kind, of something that you're looking for in your target species or biome, and then you put all this data into a spreadsheet or something, and you start crunching the data. You start analyzing it with statistical programs, right? I'll skip ahead a little bit. Blah, 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 blah. When it comes to treatments and therapies, again, this is from the medical world, the ideal is to test any such intervention using a randomized controlled trial. What is a randomized controlled trial, or RCT? Of all the many ways research can be conducted, the gold standard level of proof where treatments and therapies are concerned is the randomized controlled trial. What is this method of carrying out scientific research, and why is it so highly valued? A randomized controlled trial is an experiment or study conducted in such a way that as many sources of bias as possible are removed from the process. Basically, scientific errors of the past have taught us where we can go wrong, drawing false conclusions from our research. RCTs are designed to eliminate these major errors. In most RCTs, the goal is to determine if a specific therapy actually makes a positive difference to the people receiving it. To figure out if it does, researchers need to be able to compare. Did the children receiving a new educational program, for example, do better than those who got the old standard educational program? Did the people who took a new medication do better than those who received a placebo? Did the snake given 10% of its body weight per meal do better than the snake given 7% of its body weight per meal? Did the snake eating every 3 weeks do better than the snake eating every week? Okay, we're comparing, and then you change one variable at a time, and you do this with a large group for a long time. And the last thing to talk about is you have to randomize. You can't pick your healthiest ones to put in your test and your unhealthiest ones to put in your control group, or vice versa. You have to randomize your selection process so that your own, even subconscious bias is removed, okay? And then the last thing that I will bring up is you then have to analyze these things statistically. You can't just look at your data you collected and come to a conclusion. It's going to be tempting, but you can't do that. You have to run it through accurate statistical programs. You then have to have your research peer-reviewed, and then a scientific journal in your field of study will publish it. That published work is the gold standard of science. And it is exceedingly rare to non-existent in the wildlife fields, okay? But there are case studies and there are observational studies, thousands of them. Now, there's millions of species out there, right? If you include bacteria and things, and there's not enough scientists to have gobs and gobs of research on every single species, but there is some. However, what generally happens is a scientist or a non-scientist traveling through Togo, Benin, Nigeria, sees something from a species, in this case we're talking about ball pythons, and they go, oh, I saw this ball python doing X behavior. Okay? Now if they're a scientist and they're a good one, they're not going to extrapolate any further and try and say, this must mean that all ball pythons do this. But hobbyists do. Okay? They really do. Let me give you a couple of examples. There is documented, proven evidence that at least small ball pythons, so very young ones and maybe smaller males, will climb into the trees. There are a lot of people now, because somebody saw a ball python in a tree, who are trying to say ball pythons are semi-arboreal. Okay, that's crazy. Some other person might have set up an observational study. Really though, it's an observational study and a case study because it's covering like 1 or 2 animals. And that animal went a month and a half without eating in the wild, okay? A wild animal being tracked or followed or camera set up or whatever, all right? So this person puts this out there on the internet. It didn't get peer reviewed. It's not really replicable because they don't keep this snake under observation for a longer time after they have seen that it went 5 weeks or whatever without eating. That's it. They put this information out there. Somebody gets a hold of it and they're like, oh, ball pythons in the wild only eat once every 6 weeks or every 8 weeks. So you guys feeding yours every 2 weeks or every 1 week, you're killing them with obesity. Okay, again, not science, please. Are these sorts of observations useless? Are they misleading? No, not if we take them correctly, but to take one tiny data point on one animal, or 6 data points on 12 animals, whatever, this tiny sample size, and then try and say everyone in captivity is doing it horribly wrong and you're killing your snakes. We are going to break the world if we try to pretend that science and the scientific method are, I saw something once on the internet and now I'm gonna say everyone who doesn't do that is wrong. If that's how we're going in the world, then we're doomed. Now, let us talk about one more concept before I tell you my opinion on these particular issues, okay? You can see that I feel strongly about this. However, I am not trying to make an argument that ball pythons never go in trees. I'm not trying to make an argument that all ball pythons should be fed every single week a huge meal, okay? That's not where I'm going with this. So trust me. I just want everything to be accurate as far as the science allows, and then people can, go with their own biases from there, I guess. I want to talk about a concept called preference versus selection. I have talked about this before. It's very important if you're going to understand your animals correctly. An animal in the wild might prefer a certain habitat, a certain type of food, a certain frequency of eating, a certain temperature range, a certain terrain as far as, the tunnels that it wants, or the trees, or the rivers, or whatever. It might have all these things that, in an ideal world for that animal, it would have all these things. Because this is nature and not fantasy land, it doesn't get all those things. Sometimes it gets none of those things, right? So even though its preference is for this set of things here, set A, its selection is going to be wildly different, okay? It's going to select for wherever it can get, whatever it can do to survive, and then breed. If it can, to an animal, if it can successfully breed and a few of its offspring survive, that animal is thrilled, right? It might be hungry and thirsty. It might have an injury. It might have all this stuff happen. It might die. But if it had offspring that survived, then it has succeeded, evolutionarily speaking. All of the drives deep within an animal are for evolution for reproductive success to continue generation after generation. That is what evolution has placed in these animals. And so, yeah, would it be great to be able to always select for the exact same environment that would be your preference? Yes, that would be awesome. We'd all love that. But that's just not how it works. Even humans, and we control everything in our environment, we still don't get that. Everyone wants a bigger house. Everyone wants more delicious food that took less time to prepare, that doesn't make them fat and magically doesn't rot their teeth and doesn't hurt their heart. We want all these things from our life and our environment. That's our preference, but we don't select for them. Maybe we don't have enough money. Maybe we have just no access to them for whatever reason. I don't know. But with animals who don't control their environment very much at all, they just take what they can get, right? And they adapt and they adapt, and the populations evolve to meet the whatever environment is being given to them. So, let me now just say real quick, as far as the arboreal thing goes, should you give your ball python an arboreal setup? No. No. Don't do it. Does that mean that a ball python in the wild doesn't ever climb trees? No, I'm sure they do. It's documented. I would suggest perhaps those ball pythons are selecting for a habitat that would not generally be their preference. Maybe there is an abundance of prey in those trees and a paucity of prey on the ground. Well, the ball python is not stupid. It might not be perfectly built for climbing. It might not be the most comfortable climbing. But if there's a ton of food up there and very little food down there, he's gonna go up there. Except for a big old jumbo female who it's just not worth the risk. A 10, 12 pound female falls out of the tree, she's gonna break something and she's gonna die. She's also more prone to falling out. She can't go on as thin of branches. She's not quite as quick and dexterous just because of her sheer size. So she's not going to select for that habitat. She's going to stay where ball pythons have evolved. All right. So is a ball python arboreal? Is it semi-arboreal, whatever that means? Is it terrestrial? Is it fossorial, meaning, a tunneling species? The answer is going to be yes for all of them, right? Because it's going to take whatever it can get to get enough food. It's going to go where it needs to go to escape predators. In the rainy season, it's probably not going to be nearly as fossorial because it's going to get flooded out of its burrows. You see what I'm saying? It's going to select for whatever's going to keep it alive and help it breed and successfully get the next generation to survive. That is what it's going to do. We can remove almost all of those dangers when it's in captivity. So people who are like, well, this is what they look like in the wild, yours is much thicker, therefore yours is fat, because it's not natural, because in nature they're much more slender. Well, guess what? A lot of animals in nature are barely scraping by. They're barely getting enough food. They are much thinner and less muscular and powerful with much less fat reserves than they would like. Okay? So don't point at these starving animals, and I'm not saying all animals in nature are starving, guys. Don't take everything I say and try and make it extreme just to make it sound dumb. But do you want to mimic the wild for your captive animals? Really? Do you want to introduce parasites, extreme fluctuations in temperature, predators, floods, fires? Do you want to do this to your animals? Then why, if those things are all like, no, we don't want any of that part of nature, well, what about scarcity of food? Do you want that to be part of your captive bred animal's life, where it's always hungry, it's always stressing about where its next meal might come from? I don't. I also don't want them to get heart problems and to get too much fat on their bodies. I don't want any of that, right? So we have to come to some decisions here. What is too much food? What is not enough food? We can't just point to nature and say that whatever's happening out there, because for one, there's millions of ball pythons in nature, and some of them are fat and some of them are skinny and some of them are just right. I don't have a good peer-reviewed published article with a control group and a group that they changed the variable where they talked about amounts of food on a large scale so that they could properly apply a statistical analysis. If any of you have that, share it with me, please. But I don't think it exists. So we all just have to guess. And some people get this idea in their head that this one time somebody saw a ball python in a tree, so now you're torturing your ball python if you don't give it a tree. That's stupid. I'm sorry, but there's no thought there at all. They saw it on the internet and now everyone has to do it. That's the only thought they had. That doesn't make any sense. This girl right here, she's big. She is well over 4,000 grams, okay? Her ribs aren't poking out. I certainly don't think she's too skinny, but I also don't think she's fat. She feels strong and firm. There's no squishiness. When she bends her body, you don't see these like rolls of fat coming over. When I pull her out, she's very active. She can climb. We put her on a climbing wall and she zips right up. We don't feed her an incredible amount of food, but we feed her good, in my opinion. Is she fat? The most honest answer is I don't know, but I don't think so. That's the best I can do for you, since I lack scientific evidence, what I consider scientific evidence, not what somebody on some forum somewhere says, but what I consider scientific evidence of what the perfect conditioning for a ball python's physique should be. I don't have that. And people make these charts where they're like, if it looks like this, like a V, then it's too skinny, but if it's just a little bit rounded with a tiny bit of a V, then it's perfect. But if it gets more rounded, there's no V, then it's overweight. And then if there's a dip in the top, then it's obese and morbidly obese. You just made that up. Come on, man. Stop making things up and then trying to guilt people with it. All right? And does this concern me because it's going to affect how I keep my animals? No, it does not. But when major breeders, websites, care sheets that are viewed by thousands of people are putting this stuff out there as if it is fact, you are harming a lot of ball pythons by doing that. And your pride is why this is happening, because you're certain that you're right. You know, are rack systems perfect for a ball python or any other animal? No, they're not. Would it probably be best if even a nocturnal, at least partially fossorial snake was able to access a little bit of UV sometimes? Yeah, that probably would be best. So we're going to make some changes, and the hobby is morphing and making changes as this, all these new things are discovered, and as real science advances, and as social pressure from people who are not scientists ratchets up, we make changes, right? That's how we've always been in every hobby in humanity. We adapt over and over and over, and we change things based off of learning new things. And I will keep changing. We will fix things as I come to my own conclusions about what's best for these animals. I will fix things, and I will not prioritize money, saving a couple bucks because I can use cheaper materials or smaller enclosures or whatever. That will never be my priority. I won't do that to them. I have hundreds of animals. I will never do that. So I guess the last specific thing, ball python related, that I wanted to talk about, I don't think I'm going to call this person out specifically. I really have shied away from that on my YouTube channel. I feel like there's way too much of that. There is a well-known care sheet for ball pythons, and on there, I kid you not, it says to feed an adult ball python once every 28 to 56 days. Whoa. I'm just going to go out on a limb and say don't listen to that, okay? There's some great information on this care sheet, but what really just kills me is the author here appeals to people's desire for science-based care sheets and really pretends, I think this person even thinks they are doing everything science-based, but they're not, okay? They're not. There is nowhere that someone did a peer-reviewed, gold standard scientific method study and discovered that the health of a ball python long-term will be highest if fed once every 56 days. That is crazy, okay? I don't care if you're feeding them a meal that's half their body weight so that they're just like a sausage that can barely move for a month and a half afterwards. No, okay? Because one, that's also terrible, and two, they still need food more than once every 56 days. These animals are seasonal, right? In the wild, they don't all just stop eating entirely during the dry season, but many of them do. So adult ball pythons are adapted for a long period of fasting, but in the wet season, there's no way. You will not convince me without a scientific method type study that ball pythons go all year round with these massive gaps between each meal. No way. And there's a lot of reasons for this. I feel that the rodent populations in the wet season are so high that an efficient ambush predator like a ball python is not going to just let dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of rodents walk right by its nose and not eat them. Any of you who keep these animals, when they're on a strong eating binge, do they do that? Do they watch prey go by and just say, nah, not today, it hasn't been 28 days yet, so I can't eat yet? No, that's ridiculous. I just saw on the camera Sorry to get distracted. A little dark spot on her chin. Just making sure it's not like a scale problem or a fungus. I think it's just dirt. I'll go wash her off after this video and make sure it's just dirt. Sorry for the sidetrack. I just noticed that. I was like, oh no! But I think it's dirt. The one downside of using real substrate, the only downside, in my opinion, of using real substrate in your enclosures is that the pale parts, or if it's an all pale snake, they get dirt just crammed into their scales, and it doesn't look as nice. You know, you watch people who keep large monitors and they have 3 feet of substrate and the monitors are digging tunnels. They're filthy all the time, and your beautiful albino water monitor or whatever just looks like a dirty beast. Anyways, but don't worry, I will check. I don't know if you can see what I'm talking about, guys. Right under the bottom of her chin, right there. Hold still. I think you can see it. Anyways, I'm sorry to distract like that. I know it's already a super long video, but yeah, the best we can do in wildlife generally is observational studies. I've participated in these. My degree was in wildlife conservation, so I've done laying out live trap lines for rodents to test the species variability and the how many of them are there, and try and get statistical ideas, at least a rough estimate of how many rodents are present in a landscape. And I was in Utah, so it was a very dry place. It was not an enormous amount of vegetation, and the populations of rodents year round, even in the dry part of the summer, absolutely staggeringly high. Okay, I just can't imagine in the savannas and the lightly wooded areas in Africa where these guys thrive that there's not just billions of rodents and ground birds and lizards and anything that these guys could eat are just so prolific. So I just can't imagine, and I certainly would not assume without a very good observational study to prove it so, that they just go months without eating just because. I'm not sure why they would do that, right? They're trying to bulk up and lay eggs. That's what evolution has demanded that they try to do. So to willingly pass up food during the eating season, I don't see it. I see no possible reason for them to do that. Now, if they get a really big meal, they are going to want to go curl up in a tunnel that's safe for several weeks because they don't need more food. They're still digesting their big meal, right? So I'm not saying that they're going to eat every single day. Again, please don't take things that I'm saying and try to make them seem more extreme in order to justify something else. That's not what I'm doing, and I hope that no one else will do that. I just want people to use their brain and demand that if someone is trying to prove something with science, that it actually be science. That is a pet peeve of mine, and so I'm making the gigantic YouTube video about it. I'm sorry. But hopefully, at least for those of you who keep reptiles yourselves, this will help you make your own decisions about how to keep your animals. I'm a big proponent of exercise for reptiles. Even slow-moving, low metabolism, old world pythons like a ball python, exercise is key. The amount of food they're getting, the food type they're getting, the frequency, the size of the meal, these are all important for their physical fitness, right? But exercise is often not thought about nearly as much. Now, they don't need to run laps. This is a slow-moving snake, but they should come out in a space that's tall enough for them to utilize all these muscles on their back going up and down. One of the downsides of a tub, they're only ever going side to side, right? It's just not tall enough. So they never exercise these muscles on their dorsal surface. So you got to get them out regularly so they can exercise. Also for mental stimulation. They are not a mollusk that wants to latch onto one spot and never move again, right? As water drifts by and brings little particles for them to eat. That is not how these work. Yes, they're an ambush predator. Yes, they spend a lot of time curled up in a tunnel, but that does not mean they want to go their whole 30-plus year lifespan never ever leaving their tunnel, right? That's wild. So, oh, sorry, big girl. Yeah, use exercise. Set up little jungle gyms, places for them to run around. Like a slither around. Anyway, I have ranted 3 times longer than I ought to have done, but there was a lot to cover, and it was all on my mind, and it all felt related enough. I wanted to do it in one video instead of breaking it up, to just kind of artificially create more videos. It seems like it's all one big related subject in my mind. I apologize. I know most people just can't sit down and watch 20 or 30 minutes or whatever of a YouTube video, but it's all important, and at least now I've got it off my chest. So anyway, I'm gonna go check out Sally's chin and then put her away. I hope that you all, any of you who stuck around here till the end, we've got a lot more videos coming. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for all your support, and until next time, we're the Reptile Barn.